Hey there, scabby scummers and gangers. Crimson Oracle here with another episode of Dome Runners TV. This time I'm going to be showing off one of my recent painting projects. I got all of the Sector Frontieris terrain from the Kill Team box that I bought most recently painted up because I have In the Dark on the way and I wanted to clear the terrain backlog. I actually also went back and painted some Sector Mechanicus pipes and some other random things that were floating around so that I would have less, kind of a general terrain backlog. Because I do have this giant collection of terrain for the settlement building that is all boxed up and mostly built, but needs to be finished. So I'm going to be printing that or painting that over the course of the next probably month or so. And in the meanwhile, also working on getting more ash waste stuff printed and, getting everything kind of set for this campaign to have a variety of terrain and to make some fun stuff to use for it. So I'm going to be doing a bunch of videos about terrain stuff. I will eventually be getting back to my Battlefield on a Budget series to cover building some Zone Mortalis tiles that are made out of mostly foam. But of course, with all of this terrain sitting on my desk, I wanted to get it painted. So as you can see, the terrain is part of a collection that blends some of my older terrain that I had lying around from before the newer lines came out, and then the Sector Frontieris stuff, which was originally Riza, mixed with the Orc stuff, both the mech shop and the Orc stuff from Octarius, and of course various other bits of GW terrain mixed in. And I think that it was a fun project to kind of create this sort of frontier environment. I'm very happy with how the terrain project has turned out overall, and it was a great kind of prep for going into building the terrain tiles that I'm using for our settlements, which are, of course, in and of themselves kind of their own thing, blending a bunch of different kits together, because I like the idea that the ash waste is, people kind of scraping together the best that they can get and, making do with what they have. So that's the main kind of theme. In other news, I'm going to be doing a live stream tomorrow. So it will be at 12 p.m. Eastern US time. So that's like 5 in the UK, I believe, and sometime in the morning or late at night in New Zealand. Yeah. So, depending on where you are, it may be more or less practical for you to watch. But I'm going to be painting the Seder Art Studio dwarves. I actually have one right here. And they're these awesome old hammer style little metal models, and I primed them, and I'm going to paint them on stream on Wednesday. And then on Thursday, I'm going to build a bunch of the Eldar Corsairs, along with kit bashing the leftover parts onto bodies from Edge miniatures that I'm going to 3D print. So check all of those streams out. Once again, that'll be from around 12 p.m. On Wednesday and Thursday, 12 p.m. Eastern US time. So don't forget to check that out. As well, don't forget to subscribe and like this video, because that's how more people find the show and help the show grow. So don't forget to do that. So with this project, as with most, I started with a black undercoat of Steinel Res Primer. And I went ahead and then coated everything using a silver craft paint that I have watered down with water and flow improver in order to give it a nice smooth flow through my airbrush. I use this metal craft primer or craft paint for most of my projects. It is good enough, and you can get a ton of it for cheap, and since I do a lot of terrain, it becomes very necessary for me to try to cut costs where possible. So as you can see, I just kind of do a sweeping motion over the model. My goal is, to leave some of the black undercoating as kind of natural shading, but get that silver everywhere. Now, once I got the silver on, I wanted to give the model more of an aged kind of feel, so I came in with the burnt umber ink that dollar routing makes, and I like to come in and do kind of splotches of that kind of weather color, and that is a nice base for what we're going to do afterward to make it look dirtier. But I like to come in and especially hit areas that would have a lot of wear, or would be emitting like a sooty kind of smoke or what have you, and I just kind of come through and get a little bit of that detail, and the ink is perfect for using through the airbrush because it is nice and thin, so it goes on really easy. The only issue is that it does sometimes come up a little bit when you put a water-based paint on it, but that actually is okay for what we're doing because I'm going to be mostly bringing oils over top to start out, and then when I do add some water-based paints later, if a little bit of the ink were to sort of come up and lift off of the model, it would mix with the paint and it wouldn't be a big deal. Now that we have our silver and brown down, my next step is to mix oil paint with the thinner, which I use White Spirit, the odorless kind. That should be noted does not mean that it doesn't have fumes. You should be using this in a well-ventilated area. You should not be using white spirits in like a super tight closed space. Now, as you can see, my process is a little unscientific. When I'm doing terrain like this, I pour a bunch of the white spirit into a shot glass, and then I mix in a squirt of the black paint, and I test the output until I get the right consistency. This is not like a wash that you would use with acrylics, in that it is significantly thinner. So the goal is something that is very, very, very thin. You don't want it to feel thick or leave much of a indentation, like a residue when you put it down. So as you can see here, this was too thick, so I came in, rinsed more, and then added more of the white spirit in order to ensure that this would be the right consistency. And you'll notice that I go back over the part that was too thick. You can actually do that with oil paints even after they've set. You can come back with more of the white spirit and it will actually reactivate the paint and allow you to clean things up, which is something that a lot of people use oil washes specifically for that property. And you'll see that I am doing a particular emphasis on the lines that are sort of indented into the model. This is because the goal here is to kind of do a bit of panel lining. You can get really, really precise fill in those lines when you use an oil product because of how thin it is. You don't get that kind of that same kind of splotchy kind of effect that you get with traditional acrylic washes. Now, there will be some splotching here because I'm going a little thicker than I usually do, simply because this is a terrain piece that's going to be pretty heavily weathered, so I am going to be coming over every single bit of this model with more paint. So, this is just a base layer. It is also important that you cover your workspace with some paper towels or newsprint or something to kind of soak up the white spirit. It can damage the surface that you're working on. I obviously am a little rough on my desk as is, so I was not super careful about this, but you will notice that I tried to leave whatever leading edge that is currently wet over top of the paper towel that I have down to soak up the mineral spirits. With the bulk of the washing done, I then come in with the Vallejo brown iron oxide weathering powder, and I'm actually going to do that while the spirit on the model is still wet, and I'm actually going to mix in some of the spirit from the shadowing that I was just doing, and use that to kind of wet the pigment. This allows the pigment to kind of flow into the cracks and crevices where sometimes you get rust deposits. And I really like doing it this way. It's kind of a, I use a very worn brush in order to get that kind of natural, not brush stroke looking kind of effect. And I just sort of stipple this onto areas, particularly areas where there would be a lot of wear and tear, like areas of where foot panels are, areas that kind of get exposed to a lot of elements, edges, corners, that kind of stuff. After letting everything dry, we have this nice sort of rusty, worn looking, model, and we come back in and start doing the golds, which I use a lot as kind of a spot color on my terrain pieces because it allows for other varieties of weathering, which is something I really like to do. So I'm using Retributor Armor. It's my favorite gold for terrain because it is a nice, like, solid coverage kind of thing. You don't have to do a zillion coats in order to get that sort of bright gold color. And you can do a lot to change the sort of tone of the gold, whether you want to kind of make it more into a bronze or into a brass or something like that, by then doing different washes over top. But most of the gold is going to get weathering over top of it here, so I'm going to be, pretty slapdash with it and just get it on as much as possible. It's going to take a while. This is by far the slowest part of this painting project, and you could save a lot of time by doing less of the gold highlighting. Next, I'm going to come in with Deathcore Drab. I got this bottle of airbrush paint recently. It was discontinued, so I got a good price on it, and I decided to use it for a bunch of the kind of detailing on these various things that I'm working on. I use this to come in and do various bits of cabling and piping, and I'm going to do these big tanks on the sides with it. I find that having another color to kind of break up the monotony of the metallics is a nice way to give your piece a little bit more depth. As remember, our goal with painting a piece of terrain is less about realism, which I know some people strive for, and I don't begrudge people trying to create realistic looking terrain environments. but I personally am aiming more for something that is going to provide a nice feeling of depth and background, where the models on top are kind of, they look like they're part of an environment. And when you are trying to establish that feeling, relatively quickly, coming in and doing this little detail work where you are picking out little bits and giving them their own color, and it just helps create that kind of visual continuity between the different things that you've painted, and it helps to give the model that feeling of more detail and depth. The same idea as greebling essentially, but you're using paint in order to pick out the greebles that you want to look a little bit different. So I come through and I do that on all of these various bits. And as I was doing those little details, I spotted a bunch of areas where I wanted to come in and do a little bit more gold, so I go ahead and add that. Now, with everything dry, I'm going to come in with a Screen Products Verdigris Paint. This is one of those newfangled paints that actually has some of the chemical components of whatever weathering effect in the paint, so the final color will actually form over time after you apply the paint. So I generally do this one before bed, and then when I wake up in the morning, you get that final effect already kind of ready to go, and you don't have to sit around and wait like you do if you do it early in the morning, and then you can't work on your model for several hours. So I really like to sort of splotch this stuff on. It's primarily going on the gold because that is, where the verdigris would be forming, but I will slop it on kind of as though the water interacting with the metal led to some of the verdigris kind of settling on the areas around the gold, and that is just the kind of approach I take to this. It's a very splotchy kind of job, keeping in mind that our goal here is to create this feeling that this stuff has been left out for a lot of time in very harsh, caustic, corrosive conditions, and as a result, it is sort of gradually breaking down. So I don't worry too much about making these neat and perfect, especially because I am still going to be coming in and doing a bunch of weathering on top of this once this is done. Now that it has dried, you can see the verdigris has deepened substantially, and it has a much more organic kind of look to it. I'm going to come in with black Steinal res and a sponge, and I'm going to be splotching just, the kind of wear and tear marks onto the model. And once again, the goal here is not necessarily to create something that's visually realistic so much as to create a feeling of depth when you view the model in the context of models being on top of it. So I will be going around to areas where there will be a lot of wear, especially around the edges and trim of things, and just sponging on little chips and bits. And I will kind of start very light, and I will come back around and do more and more as I go. Next, I'm going to come in with just a teeny bit of red. I'm using corn red for this, but the color doesn't really matter. I'm just going to be doing little buttons and such that are on the various panels, because those are just little bits of detail that help to, again, deepen the sort of feel of the model. And here the same deal, I am coming in with some of the Vallejo blue-green in order to provide a little bit more kind of detail color on various buttons and such. Here is where things start to really come together. We're going to use our white spirit once again and a desert dust pigment from Vallejo, and I'm going to be bringing that desert dust pigment into lots of the nooks and crannies and little bits of this model, as well as onto the sides of the panels and just everywhere kind of it can get. Keeping in mind that the nice thing about weathering powder is that when you apply it, it's not permanent. You can come back and you can change it. It's not like acrylic paints where once it's dried, that's it. You can come back and sort of thin it out if you put too much on. And of course, you can always add more. You will notice I tend to get sloppier as I go here. That is because I am planning on coming back over with a dry brush, an empty dry brush, to kind of dust away a lot of the excess weathering pigment on the outsides. But I want to make sure initially that all of those sort of nooks and cranny areas get their coating, because I want to make sure that it has that kind of, that feeling that the wind has been blowing the dust into all the crevices and such. So we're going to come back in a moment and you'll see everything dried and what it looks like, because you won't know what the full effect is until it's dried. Now, as you can see, the pigmentation is much stronger the next day. So I come in with this is an old makeup brush. Well, it's a new makeup brush, but it's a cheap makeup brush that I use for this purpose. I come through and I dust all of that into kind of a more organic, natural looking kind of appearance. Now, from here, you could varnish and, set the pigment in, its current configuration. And a lot of people do that because they don't want their, weathering pigment kind of flaking off as they use their models and such. And I totally understand why people do that. But unfortunately, you are never going to get that kind of fully dusty kind of appearance, that super matte kind of appearance, when you are putting a liquid over top of it in order to fix it in place. So I actually tend to leave my weathering pigments unfixed and just, sort of reapply them if they come off too much, but mostly try to get them into the crevices so they're not covering the parts of the model that you're going to be handling a lot. So as you can see, the final effect is a model that is extremely dusty. And now, as a kind of final step, I am going to come in with more oil wash in order to kind of go back over the little areas where I did a lot of the kind of weathering. I want to make sure that those details pop, even with the weathering pigment over top. And now for our final bit of detail, I am going to be coming in with a yellow from Vallejo, their airbrush paints, and doing a lighting effect on all of these strobe lights that are on the model. And I come back in once I have put the yellow down and mix in some white with the yellow and come back over to get that kind of zenithal appearance. And here it is, the completed work on all of the models. Obviously, I pretty much showed the main model when I was working through this video, but I applied the exact same techniques to all of these models and got them to be exactly where I wanted them. And I'm very happy with how it all turned out. It will all match very nicely with the Octarius terrain that I already did, and with all of my previous terrain. As you saw at the start of the video, I have everything kind of ready to go for doing, these battles and settlements and whatnot in the Ash Waste, so that is very exciting. Thanks, as always, to my patrons for helping make it so I can do this content on a regular basis. And, of course, if you are interested in helping to support the show, you too can sign up for Patreon for as little as $2 a month. You can get your name listed at the end of the videos and know that you're helping support the show. Plus, you'll get podcast episodes early and access to the show's Discord. But all for $2. It's a good deal. And of course, don't forget to check out my podcast, The Dome Runners, coming back with regular episodes once again. So excited to be putting that out. And finally, of course, everybody stay safe and don't forget to change your paint water.